Hi guys, and welcome to a new series of videos, all for the database exam, and we're going to be looking at the June 2022 exam paper. So let's have a look inside the paper and see what's asked of us inside of the first part of the questions. We're given a scenario that we need to look at. You must make sure that you spend a bit of time looking at this scenario. This gives us a few hints and tips to the sorts of things that we might need to apply inside of our table structures when we create them. We can see quite clearly that we're working for an automatic vending service company, and we're going to be creating some form of database for its employees. Let's have a little look at our data set that we're given. So you can see from the data set that we're given 12 field areas to look at. Now, as a rule of thumb, and this is my suggestion to any student that's going to be doing this exam, is look for the fields that have a clear ID identifier on them. This will give us an indication as to at least one or two of the tables that we need to create when we do our normalization. So let's look at the data set we've got. We can quite easily see that we have performance grade ID and position ID. I would take these two fields out and separate them out so that you can then start to put other fields underneath them that could work with those field areas. So we're going to put the fields to one side. So we're going to have performance grade ID and position ID. We're going to look at the logical fields that will go underneath each of these. So the logical one would be grade description underneath the performance grade ID, and then we're going to move position underneath position ID. We're now going to then create another table which is going to deal with our staff. Under here we're going to be using the staff reference, the surname, the staff days per week, the staff start date, staff end date, and their telephone number. Then we're going to need a joining table. In this, we're going to be putting position start date and position end date because employees can be part of the team and have different roles during their employment. And we're going to link this by using position ID and staff reference ID to create what's known as a composite primary key. So each of our tables is going to have a primary key. We're going to have the performance grade ID as a primary key, staff reference as a primary key, position ID as a primary key, and then our composite primary key, which is the position ID and staff reference in the staff position table. First thing we need to do is go into the Access database program itself. As you can see from the screen that I'm showing right now, you'll be able to choose from a number of different options. First option that we're going to choose is blank database. What this will all prompt us to do is to give a file name for this new database that we're going to create and give it a location of where we want to create the database. You're going to give it a name, this database. I'm just going to call it database for this example. And then I'm going to choose a location for it to go. In the exam itself, you're going to have a paper A folder where you need to put your database file in, as you're going to have another folder later on the paper B where you're going to need to put the database for that one. So choose your location by clicking on the folder option and choose the location from the dialog box that pops up. Once you're happy with that, I'm going to click on create, and it takes us straight into our database area where we can see we're instantly put into a datasheet view. What we want to do is we want to move out of this datasheet view into a design view for the table itself. As we did earlier on, we did some normalization and we need to create the tables that we've normalized. So in order for us to do this, we're going to click on the design tool option, which is the triangle and the ruler. And if you do the drop down on there, you'll see that we are in datasheet view and we want to go into design view. So once we click on that, because this is the first table that we're creating of our database, it will automatically prompt us to save our table. So what we're going to do is we can use the prefix which we're required to do in the exam, which is TBL. And then I usually put an underscore just to separate out the table. And then I'm going to call this my first table, which in our normalization, we were going to have a table that was called table staff. So we're just going to put in staff. Once I click on OK, what should happen is we should go into the design view and we can see all of the properties sheets and the options that we have available to us in this exam. What we want to do is notice that the first field that's been provided to us by the database, in this instance, it was an ID. However, please don't get lulled into a false sense of security here. When we create new tables, it won't automatically put the ID in for us, so we're going to have to make sure that we put the ID in when we do these later. However, in this instance, we're not going to leave it as just the field name ID. We're going to give it the appropriate name, and that's going to be staff ref. Now, staff ref is the ID or the identifier that was given to us by the exam board, and we're going to use the data type in this instance for it to be of an auto number. Notice that we're just going to leave all of the field properties and the property sheets as they are and move on to the next field. This one's going to be surname. Now, as you can see as I'm typing through, I'm going to choose the data type of short text. But as a rule of thumb, we should always make sure that we change the field size of this field. We should never leave it as its default 255. So in this instance, I'm just going to change it to 25. What we can also do is we can put in a validation rule that it is required. So we're going to put in a validation rule of is not null. Now, what is not null does is it requires the user to actually input a value into the field name of surname. It cannot have no value whatsoever. And what that will do is it will prompt the user to do so. And what we need to do is we need to move into the validation text area where we explain to the user what the problem is. Otherwise, if we use the generic alert box that pops up, it will give no information that's of use to the actual user on the other end. If we put our own one, it might make it a little bit more self-explanatory and easy to understand. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to put in a value of please enter a surname value. Now I'm happy with that, so I'm going to move on to the next field in our table, and that next field in our table is going to be staff days per week. Now, in this instance, the staff days per week is going to be a number, and we want to give some more information into this area here because it's going to only allow a number of weekdays to be attended by that person. Now, as we saw inside of our early information that we were given inside of the actual exam paper, we were told that the worker can only have a minimum of 2 days and a maximum of 3. So what we can do is we can go inside of our validation rule again here, and what we're going to do is we're going to put in the option for between, and then we're going to choose 2 and 5. Now these keywords here of between and will capitalize as soon as I press enter. And what that means is that the validation rule will look for the values between 2 and inclusive of 2 and 5 and inclusive of 5. So again, as we did with the surname, we're going to give a validation piece of text so that the user knows what to expect and what to do. So we're going to put in here that the number of days, days must be 2 or a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 5. So that's a nice little indicator there for the user to make sure that they do exactly that, put a value bit of 2 and 5 or anything in between. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I'm going to move on to the next field. So the next field inside of my table is going to include the staff start date. So in here, I'm going to put in staff start date, and this is quite clearly going to be a time date for us here, and we can choose what format we're going to have that date appear as. So in the properties box down the bottom, we're just going to use the drop down box here, and we're going to use the medium type size date, which actually no, what we'll do is we'll keep it to the short date. That makes it a lot easier and much more in line with what the data set is inside of our exam. So we're going to leave that as it is, and we're going to move on again. So if that's the start date, we're going to also include the staff leaving date. Now we're going to choose this one to be, again, the date time, and we're going to leave that as the format to be short date. Now I am going to pop back to the staff start date, because if you think about it, when a staff member starts a job, there's a start date. No one can begin an employment without having a start date, so this should be a required field. So what we can do here, like we did with the previous two fields before that, is we're going to put in a validation rule to say that this must not be null. So is not null, and we're going to put a validation text in again. We're just going to put, please enter a start date. So we're going to jump back into our fields, and we're going to put one final piece of information in, which is going to be the telephone number. So we're going to put the telephone number for the staff member. This is going to be short text. Now the reason it's short text is because if we was to put it as number, and I put 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the number at the beginning, being 0, will be automatically omitted, and we want to keep that phone number in there with a 0 at the beginning. So we need to create this to be a short text. However, what we can do is go to the field size, and we know that we're going to have a value that will not exceed a field size of 11. We can also go one step further, and we can apply an input mask on this. What we can do is we can put in that the value will be 0, 0, and we're going to put 11 zeros in there. Now we can put a bit of a space in there, but I'm just going to leave it as is. So we're going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Then we're going to put a semicolon, and then we're going to put another 0. What that means is it's a placeholder for us, and we're going to be able to show the value of 0 and then enter in everything, so it overwrites that. Now I'm pretty happy with that table right now. I'm going to click on the view option. What that will do is it will automatically prompt us to save the table, and we're going to click on yes. Now I'm not going to put any data in here just yet, because I need to make sure that I've got all of my relationships established for this table. So I'm going to come back out of that by just clicking on close, and then we're going to move on to the next table. I'm going to move on to the next table that we need to create inside of our Access database. In this table, what we're going to do is we're going to use the two of the easier tables first of all. So the first table that we're going to create is going to be the table for position. So in order to do that, we need to go up to our ribbon at the top of our Access database, and we're going to select the create option. From here, we can see that we can go into table or table design. Ideally, we should go into table design just as a matter of a rule of thumb. So once you click on that, we go straight into the design view, which is really where we need to be. First of all, we're going to choose to add our ID. Now notice, unlike the table before, there is no ID provided to us and for us. So we're going to need to make sure we put in our IDs here. So the first ID that we're going to need to put inside of this table for table position is obviously position ID. So we're going to put in here the position ID. Now the data type that we need to choose for this one is going to need to be auto number. So auto number can be found around about halfway down, and we select that. So that's quite straightforward. That's an easy one to do. Then we're going to go on to position. Position itself is going to be typed in by us. So what we're going to need to do is go into position, and that should be fine. And like we did in the previous table, we're not going to leave the defaults there. We're going to just change that, and we're going to change it to 25. We are going to add in here that also needs to be is not null. And then we're going to put in, please enter a position value. Now, it's not that you need to do that, but if you just get into the routine of making sure that things that are required, that should be in a table, are not left as blank, then that would be good practice. So I'm just going to click on the X on the option for our tab here, and notice because we've not put a name in it, it's going to ask us to make sure we save the changes, and we're going to go yes, and we're going to go in with our prefix again, which is TBL underscore position, and we're going to click on OK. Now notice it's prompted us straight away to say that we didn't declare a primary key. Now earlier on I said that we were given a primary key by the database itself and it already had the primary key identified. We didn't do that. So what we need to do is we're just going to go no in this instance, or cancel, sorry, and we're going to go in and we're going to make sure that this position ID is actually a primary key. So what we need to do is select on the primary key option here, or if you wanted to, you could highlight the row itself and right click and then do primary key there as well. There are two different ways in which you can approach that. Now if I click on the X button and click on yes for save, thankfully it's left in there my little prefix of TBL position, and I'm going to click OK. Now we have our second of our potential 4 tables that we're going to need to create. So we're going to move back in and we're going to go up to the create option again. We're going to click on the table design and we're going to move on to the next table, which is table grade. In the table grade, we're going to need to put in our performance grade ID as our primary key. So we're just going to type that in there now. And we're going to also choose, like we did before, the auto number as our data type. Next, we need to put in what the grade descriptor is itself. So I'm going to do grade descriptor. And we're going to choose that to be short text. And again, we're just going to move that to 25 from its default of 255. Before I forget, I'm going to choose my row here. I'm going to click on that to be my primary key. And now I'm going to close the table just to prompt me to save. Click on yes. And we're going to type in here TBL underscore grade. Now I'm happy with that, and we're going to move on to our 4th and final table in the creation of this database. This one is going to deal with the staff positions. Now earlier on we mentioned that we're going to have a number of different staff, we're going to have a number of different positions and a number of different grades. And how do they all link? Well, we're going to link them with this 4th table. Now each individual employee can be employed at the company, and they can have an employment date of, say, yesterday. They could change their role, and their job role that they've changed to, that means they have a different start date. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've stopped working for the company. It just means that they have a different role and a different start date for that role in the company. So we need to create the staff position table. So we're going to click on create here. We're going to go to design, and we're going to go and start by adding one of our first foreign keys, which we're going to use as a collective to create what's known as a composite primary key. So the first one we're going to be using is going to be staff ID, or the staff reference. Now, because this is a foreign key, so it's a primary key taken from another table, we don't put this as auto number, we put it as a number, because it might find that it repeats itself when we start to enter in our data later. The next of our 2 foreign keys that we're going to have inside of our table is going to be the position ID. And like the staff reference, this is going to be a number because we're pulling it through from another table. So it's a foreign key, is a primary key from another table. And we're going to use the collective of these 2 to create a unique identifier. So like I said to you earlier on, we're going to have a position where someone changes that position. And that could be that they get a promotion, for example. So their ID and the position ID should never really be, if they're combined together, the same. So that would be a good opportunity for us to create this composite primary key. So if I select the 2 cells themselves, or the 2 rows here, and click on primary key, notice that both of them have a key established and linked to it. That's because we're using both the values here to create a unique identifier as a collective. So that creates our unique identifier for this table. Next, we're going to need to move on and put the rest of our fields that we need inside of our table. We're going to type in the position, start date. So what date they started that job role inside of that company itself. So we're going to change the data type in this one to be time date. And we're going to also then put in the position end date. So as I was mentioning earlier on, a person might find that they get a promotion, so their original role has an end date, and then their new role has a new start date. They're still employed by the company, but they can appear multiple times inside of this table. And finally, we need to apply the performance grade ID. And this is going to be a number because it's taken from another table, it's a primary key from another table, and I'm happy with that.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at an alternative option for us when it comes to performance grade ID. This can also be our table lookup option inside of our exam paper. What you can do is you can select the field itself, and if we go to lookup, you may notice that at the moment it is a text box. That's because we're allowing the user to input a value, 1, 2, 3. But we're assuming that the users understand what those primary or foreign keys will be. They might not understand that 1 means excellent, 2 means good, and 3 means requires improvement, or so on. So what we can do is we can create this to be our table lookup. So first thing we need to do is select this display option down here, and we're going to choose the option for combo box. Notice as soon as I select that, we get a few other options in our property area down the bottom, one which refers to a table or query. We're leaving that as it is, but we're going to look at the row source. This is where we're going to choose the row or even the table that we're going to be choosing to get the values from. So we want to select the table grade table. So as we're going to do later on with our queries, what we're going to do is we're just going to select the table grade here by double clicking, or you can drag it onto your area here. And you'll notice you have 2 fields inside that table. We're interested in both. We're going to get the performance grade ID and the grade descriptor. Once we've done that, we're going to click on close and then click on yes. What that's done now is put in a query for us in this area here, but notice it's got bound to column 1. Well, we want to keep it bound to column 1 because that's where the ID value is, but notice it only has 1 column count here. We're going to need to make sure that that's 2 because we had 2 field areas in there, didn't we? We had the actual descriptor itself. So what we want to do is we want to allow that to be 2 here. So what we'll do is we're going to click on save. So I've zoomed forwards a little bit here just to show you what happens by adding the actual value and having 2 column counts in this table lookup. You'll see that when I drop down that option, we can see that we have the ID and the value there, so people can understand what it is rather than just typing in a number.
So now we've created this table, we're going to click on the X, close it, and click on yes to save. We're going to use a prefix as before. We're going to do TBL underscore, and we're going to do staff position. And then click OK. So we've now established our 4 tables that we need for this database. The next step for us is to create the relationships between them. So we need to do this by clicking on the database tool option at the top of our ribbon. Notice we have this little button here that I'm circling around at the moment where we have our relationships. We're going to double click and open that, and that takes us into this grey area here. Now notice there's nothing else in here, and what we want to do is we want to see the tables. So if we click on the add tables option, you'll notice that the bar at the side swipes out a little bit, and we should be able to see all of the tables that are inside of this database. Now what we can do is we can just simply drag them out into the table area, or we can double click on them. Either or, we've now got our 4 tables as we want to see them. Now if you find that you've got tables that look like this where you've got a scroll in them, you can just drag that down so you get all of the data in, or even if they're a little bit too narrow, you might want to make them a bit wider, you can do the same here.
Now what we're going to do is, this is where we create our relationships between the tables. Now I'm just going to order this around a little bit so that it's easier for you to see. And what I want to do is I want to establish the relationship, the link, the holding hands between the tables. Now what we do is we move by clicking on the primary key in one table here, and we can drag that value over into the next table where it's got position ID, and then let go. What we're doing is saying make a bond on this one here, position ID, with this position ID in this table over here. So what happens is a little dialog box will pop up, and it will ask us to make sure that we want to choose these fields from these tables to create the relationship. And what we do is we create a referential integrity enforcement, and we cascade and update and delete the records as they appear inside the record, if inside the database, if anything changes. Notice we have a relationship type here of one to many, so we can say that one position can appear many times inside of the staff position table when we look at that, and then we click on create. Notice we have now this one symbol and the infinity symbol here, which denotes our many. So one position in this table here can appear many times in here, because it could be that there's many different people employed by the company that hold the same position. For example, cleaners. We're going to do the same with the tables for staff and grade. We're going to just drag over the staff reference, and we're going to drop that into the position. Notice we have our one to many again. We're going to click on the enforcement again, and we're going to click on create. And in our final relationship, we're going to drag our performance grade ID into the staff position, and again we're going to click on the enforcement of the referential integrity and click on create. So we can see here that one grade that might be in this table over here will appear many different times, because it could be many people achieving the same grade in terms of bonuses. We can see here that we should only really have one member of staff inside of our staff table, but they may appear inside the staff position because they might get multiple promotions, so they will have different positions during their employment. And that concludes the creation of our relationships and the data structures for this database. What we're going to then now need to do is input the data inside of these tables, so that we can make sure that the relationships do in fact work, but also an opportunity for us to check that we put in the right data types and also the validation rules, etc. So I'm just going to click on close on here. I'm going to click on yes, and then that should be our tables ready for data input.